Wow, it's nice to see you guys. Nice to see you in two services. I'm not sure if you had them the last time I was here. And, I've always had this feeling that Sunridge had a lot that God wanted to do here, and that a lot that you guys really couldn't even imagine about doing. And just speaking with Pastor Curtis between services, he's telling me how you're sending people out to minister in other churches to share not just worship, but the word. And you're becoming kind of an incubator for ministers, and that's an amazing place to be. When you reach out in the community, you never know what's going to happen or the impact it's going to have. Even talking with the food bank this morning, when I became a Christian, I was 16 years, before I became a Christian, I was 16 years old. I was living on the streets of London, Ontario. My dad had kicked me out, and I was averaging one meal every 3 days. And a lot of when I did eat was from a soup kitchen or from the food banks. So if you're wondering, all this stuff that you guys do for the food bank, is there an increase? Is there multiplication? Here's the multiplication. It very, very much made an impact. No, I'm not going to say any more before I stick my foot in my mouth. And being that I'm size 16 feet, it could be impressive. For those of you who don't know us, I'm Darren McCrea, originally from London, Ontario. My wife, Patty, she's Colombian. Been serving in missions in Bogota, Colombia myself for 28 years, and my wife all of her life. We have two boys, James and Darren. James is right now studying at the University of Waterloo. He's in his last year of studying geography and aviation to become a commercial pilot. He's doing his absolute best to make us proud and broke at the same time. And Darren is right now in the Cartagena, Colombia airport, where he's just finished the lecture phase of a Youth with Mission Discipleship Training School, and he's about to get on a plane, traveling first by himself before he joins up with his team in Madrid, Spain. And for the next 2 months, in two countries that I can name and two that I cannot because we're online, they will be focusing on the Muslim world, doing an outreach before he heads off next year to study arts and business, also at the University of Waterloo. So right now, Patty and I are in that weird place where we're starting out as empty nesters. Now, if you don't understand what empty nesters means, it means you're kind of in mourning and celebrating at the same time. I see some people that are identifying with us. But what I want to share with you this morning, I want to actually share something I'm not really good at. Something I'm good at doing, just not something I'm good so much at promoting, and that's missions. Now, that might sound really funny because we're missionaries. We talk about missions, we do missions, but we haven't really encouraged people in the fact that even here, you can go out and do missions in a lot of different ways. And so we're going to talk about that this morning, even as we spend the time to share a report and let you see what we're doing in the ministry. So, but before I get into it too much, I want to share a short video with you, just 3 minutes, and we'll come back. There you see a little bit of the testimony of some of the things that God's been doing over the last couple of years. And I really love sharing testimonies. I love sharing them because of the wonderful, amazing things that God does, but I also love sharing them because it gives me an opportunity to show you what you're doing through us. Absolutely everything you see that God is able to enable us to do in Columbia is because churches and individuals like yourselves support us. And just between services, out of curiosity, I looked up. In April, it'll be 10 years that Sunridge has been partnering with us. So yeah, we love you, and we love seeing the journey that you're on, even as you journey along with us. So we love sharing the amazing things that God does, even though we've just gone through one of the most difficult times in our lives in ministry with COVID and everything else. But God moves when we're willing to say, I will trust you and I will serve you. But when you hear a testimony, it also means that there's a need behind the testimony. And sometimes those needs never seem to have an answer. It's just one more thing on the list of needs. Have you ever heard so many needs sometimes that you just want to hide from them? And listening to those needs around us can be challenging, and even listening to the testimonies of what God has done can be the same. They can be challenging. And if I were to be honest, those testimonies at times can even be a little depressing. Now, you might wonder, okay, I can understand how testimonies could be encouraging, but how can they be depressing? How can a good testimony get you down? Well, sometimes just not being able to participate in the testimony, or thinking that we can't participate in the testimony, thinking that we can't participate in the miracle, is a really good way for Satan to take advantage and get us down. And it's a really good way for Satan to convince us that we can do nothing. And it's depressing. And many of us do nothing simply because we think we can't make a difference. Or we come to church, we'll go to the prayer meetings sometimes, or we'll do Sunday school or midweek services, and we have the miracle around us, we have the testimony around us, but we don't feel like we're part of the testimony. We don't feel like we're part of the miracle. And so many of us do nothing simply because we think we can't make a difference. And I want to examine that thought a little this morning, more about the idea that we can't make a difference. But first I want to take a look at what missions is, what missions really is. And that's kind of my theme this morning, what missions really is, where missions really starts, and the foundational part that every one of you has in reaching the world. And the answer to your part in reaching the world might surprise you. Money has nothing to do with it. Let's look at what missions is. Let's look at what I call God's greatest hits. Do we go? Yeah, I'm on. You might have to give me a boost on the first slide. There we go. The Great Commission. For many, this is Christianity 101, the basics. But let's read it anyways. Matthew 18:28, verses 18 to 20. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you always, even to the very end of the age. So if this is Christianity 101, why would I read it? Well, about 3 years ago, there was a survey done in a Bible college in Alberta. Now, I'm not going to name which Bible college it was, but if I recall correctly, 6 in 10 students had no idea what the Great Commission was. Bible college students in an evangelical Pentecostal Bible college. And they couldn't state the simple idea that we're supposed to go to all nations and we're supposed to make disciples, replicates of who we are in Jesus, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and that Jesus is guaranteed that his presence will be with us as we do it. Now, for me, here, the idea is pretty basic. If Jesus Christ is God, and he died for me, then there is no sacrifice that I can make in my life that is greater than the sacrifice that he already made for me, living on this earth and going to the cross. And he's declared that I am supposed to go and make disciples everywhere, and that I'm supposed to teach them to obey. Now, if I'm teaching them to obey, it might be a really good idea if I obey myself. And if we're obeying, then he will be with us in that process. So many times we don't see God in our daily lives because we're not obeying what he's told us to do. But after the Great Commission comes what I call the Great Clarification in Acts 1:8, or Acts 1:7 through 8. He said to them, "It's not for you to know," Jesus speaking, "the times or dates the Father has set by his authority. But you'll receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all of Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." Jerusalem, national. Jerusalem, local. Judea, national. Samaria, international, close by. Ends of the earth. But before he gives us the Great Commission, before he tells us to go out, before he sends us to these nations and to our area, he said something else. It's not for you to know the times or the dates the Father has set by his authority. Now, I received Jesus in 1984 when I was 17 years old. And I knew nothing about Christianity. I didn't know the difference between Christians and a brick wall. And there's a lot of resemblance sometimes. And I say like that when I look like I'm, sucking on lemons when I'm in a good mood. But everybody was talking, no, Jesus is coming soon. Jesus is coming back really soon. There are studies of, I think it was Hal Lindsey, The Late Great Planet Earth, all these books on eschatology, which is the fancy way of saying the last days. And everybody was convinced that Jesus was coming back any moment. Well, now, 30 years later, people are still saying that Jesus is coming back really soon. And there's still the arguments, pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib. And people say, what do you believe, Darren? I said, when he comes, I'm going. It's not that I don't have my views on eschatology. I do. I've studied it. I even have a degree for the course I took. But when he comes, I'm going. Because I don't want to allow the distraction of the end times to get in the way with what I should be doing now. Jesus himself said it's not for you to know the times or the dates. In other words, Jesus says, don't worry about when I'm coming back. Or to paraphrase millions of adult drivers talking to their kids throughout time, Jesus says, I'll get there when I get there. Stop asking how long. Jesus saying, kids, I'll get there when I get there. Church, I'll get there when I get there. For the moment, focus on what's happening outside of this window. Focus on what's happening in the journey, or you might miss something. And it's not just that you might miss something, but it's about the people that you should be sharing your faith with that will miss something, that will miss eternity because you're too focused on when I'm coming back rather than what I came for. We get so wrapped up in the when, the maybe, and trying to figure it out that we forget about the command itself. Take your power and be my witnesses. And then Jesus tells us where to witness. Locally, nationally, internationally, close by, and ends of the earth. And you might ask, well, how do I get to the ends of the earth? Well, there's 3 ways. Go yourself, pray your way there, intercede for the nations, or send people like me. And as to the how, the technique to use, for that we have the next of the greats, the great requirement. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. To walk justly, to love mercy, and act humbly with your God. Then there's the last of the greats, what I call the great caveat, the two-handed gospel. Too often our well-meaning turns into secular charity, and we leave the gospel out of our actions. To put it in other words, sometimes we get so focused on helping people with their physical needs, we forget about their spiritual ones. To quote a rather well-known preacher, says, our social justice must include proclamation whenever possible. And our proclamation must be salted with the compassion and mercy of social action. Beware of the tendency to be more excited about the good works than we are about the good news. The reconciling gospel is always at the forefront of the church's social action, because a full belly is not better than a reconciled soul. A full belly is never better than a reconciled soul. Better eternally hungry than eternally without God. So what's the heart of missions? Not my will, his submission. I will go because he has called me to go. And if I cannot go internationally, I will go nationally. And if I cannot go nationally, I will go locally. And while I go locally, I will reach out to those that are close by. My family, my neighbors, my kids' school. And wherever I cannot go myself, I will help to send others to take my place. And when we send that person, wherever that particular place is, we're sending a new seed to a foreign soil. And by sending a new seed, we are producing a new harvest in that place. And many times it produces a crop never before seen. Missions changes a community that cannot change itself because a new point of view is added and we get new results because of it. But when I go, I will go in humility. I do not have all the answers. And I will go as a servant, but above all, I will go in obedience to the one who sacrificed everything. And that is the heart of missions. And missions is never accomplished alone. It is always, always, always a team effort. Missions is accomplished through the feet of those who go, the knees of those who pray, and the hands of those that give. Over the last 3 years, Patty and I have been privileged to do a lot. Over the course of our missionary career, we've had the privilege to do so many things. When COVID first started, we thought, we were locked up in our house, we thought missions was done for a while. And then God had us take the little we had and start to feed people because they needed to be fed. And what we thought was going to be a few dozen families over a few weeks ended up being 2,000 families over 9 months. And as the church was reopening, us figuring we couldn't do anything, we ended up putting an entire second story on a church that had no Sunday school. All they had was a sanctuary, and buying the 2 adjoining lots. We started working on expanding the Refuge Boys Home that we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. And so many things. And sometimes looking at everything we've done, sometimes I ask myself, how did we get here? How did a street kid from East London, a girl from one of 5 daughters to a single mother from a poor neighborhood in Bogota, Colombia, how did we get here? But you know what the difference is between me and you? Do you want to know what my reward is compared to yours? Do you want to know what my reward is compared to Pastor Curtis's, or to Jody, or to Jen, or any one of you in this room? I can answer that question. If you're being obedient to what God has called you to do, doesn't mean if that doesn't matter if it's cleaning the floors in the basement. It doesn't matter if it's teaching Sunday school. It doesn't matter if you're part of the local board of education, because God has called you to be an influence in our education system that God knows we need it. Doesn't matter if you're a candidate for mayor. If you're being obedient to what God has called you to do, whatever that is, however big or small, your reward is exactly the same as mine. Because God doesn't care about the size of your endeavor. He cares about the size of your obedience. God does not care about the size of your endeavor. He cares about the size of your obedience. I like that so much I translated it into Spanish. A Dios no le importa el tamaño de tu proyecto o tu esfuerzo. Le importa el tamaño de tu obediencia. He cares about your obedience because when you do your part, however small, the results are up to Him. And He can produce amazing results with the smallest efforts, but it all depends upon your obedience, because He has declared the way we're to reach this world is by our service to Him in obedience and love. 39 years ago, as a brand new 17-year-old believer, I got saved in street ministry, and I started mopping floors in that street mission, leaving a really worn-down building looking not bad. And most times, people didn't notice my work, but it's something that needed to be done. And then I started opening the doors at the mission space, taking on more responsibility. And some people actually started to notice Bubba, the street kid. And people like you, the church, loved me. They gave me compliments. Compliments might not sound like much, but when my father used to say that I was as useless as breasts on a bull, compliments were really needed. And even when I had attended church and maybe didn't dress right or maybe didn't even smell right, you sat beside me. Some of you even put your arms around me. Have you ever put your arm around a grizzly? It takes guts. And sometimes you even took me out to lunch or you invited me to youth camp where you volunteered, or maybe just bought me a pair of shoes. And then I started setting up chairs at church. And for the first time, I felt included, because this was something that I could do. Me, the reject, the little fat kid that was obscenely bullied his entire childhood, the kid from the broken home. Slowly, I started to feel included. And then you needed help painting and so many other things, and I began to feel more than just included. Suddenly in the church, I felt needed. I felt needed for the first time in my life. And then you needed help running the sound. So I volunteered. Now, I had no idea what I was doing, and it's a proof that miracles happen that I didn't blow up the entire sound system. But you were willing to teach me, so I said yes. Because now I was part of a family. And family helps family. Family shows up when they're needed. It's part of the deal. And during church events, I would look and I saw the resigned face of the pastor as more and more people left the building when there was still so much more cleanup that needed to be doing. So many things that still needed to be packed away. And I decided right then, because I could see that my pastor was not just dragging his feet, he was dragging his heart. Because he would be saying goodnight to his family, not knowing that he would be able to get home before they were already in bed and asleep. And I made up my mind right then that I would never go home until he did. That in any church function where I was serving, I would stay until the end. So that maybe, just maybe, my pastor could get home to his family before they gave up and went to bed without him. And there I started to learn empathy and responsibility. And even years later, when I had my own family wanting to go home because they had school the next day, either they stayed with me to help or I found them a ride home because my pastor had a family. And I needed to be a godly example to mine. I wanted my family to remember my dedication to God, to his church, and to my pastor, so that they would never forget that example for themselves. Then at the mission, I started a Christmas dinner for the lonely and hurting at Christmas Eve. And I found that I could lead and be an example for my community. And I worked at 1,000 little tasks around the mission into my church because you showed me how. And then came missions, and I learned how to build, but even building, ministering to kids. And the simple act of playing with them changed their hearts. Years later, I would hear the story of one young girl who learned about the Father's love through me and my team because we took time to play with them. We changed her destiny. So many people in the church, they think they can't make a difference, especially the older generation. And yet you can make such a huge impact in a little child just by being there and loving them. So many grandparents in this church, parents, yet how many kids out there don't have parents or grandparents? And you ever see a little child when they've just made something and they really, really, really want to show it to somebody to say, hey, or to hear, hey, I'm proud of you, well done? You ever seen that with your own kids or with your grandkids? How about being a grandfather for Jesus in Sunday school? Even all you can do is sit there and have some little boy or some little girl run up to you and say, look what I made. And you say, wow, I'm so proud of you. That's amazing. Those few seconds of service can make an eternal difference in the life of that child. I don't care how old or how young you are. There is no place you cannot serve in the kingdom, and God has never done with you until you're with him. Later on, we adopted an orphanage, changing the destiny of dozens of kids more, hundreds of kids more. And we've done so many other things, impacted so many people, but I kept learning. I learned that by keeping my word in something so simple as obtaining an email address, I could change lives forever. I promised Justin, a short-termer missionary from the U.S., that I would get Jamie's email for him. And because I fulfilled my word, it sparked a long-distance relationship that turned into marriage, 2 children, and a future career in the Dominican Republic as missionaries. Listening to God, keeping my word, I changed their destiny. And yet we continue to look at bigger things, even beyond the small things that we keep doing. As we start working on building a church and a Christian school on an enormous plot of land. Even though we don't have all the permits yet, Pastor Haman has cleared the land and turned in their rented space, putting up 250-seat tents on the lot. Because if Israel could do it, so can a bunch of Colombians, until their promised land is ready for them. A 6-acre lot, building a church for up to 800, and a Christian school because God taught us to change destinies, trusting in him. Now we've just finished the primary school, and you can see where the 800-seat gymnatorium will go on that large cleared circle spot of land in the future. Trust me, you don't want me to get off my notes. We'll be here until midnight. Looking here, off to the right will be this. Actually, it's being built now as the preschool, and off to the left will be the high school. Initially, for some 300 students, but absolutely everything being built on this land in the most Catholic city in Colombia. Although it's designed for 300 students, everything has all the footers and columns in so that we can put a second floor on everything and double the capacity. Then we also have some smaller goals. Just over a year ago, we broke ground on the longest, thinnest piece of land for a church that you have ever seen, wedged between two other buildings. But for 19 years, Pastors Albeiro and Diana on the right and left have been working to build their church in a tough-to-reach community called McCrea. And for years, they had only rented buildings. Then one day, mortgage in hand, they bought this lot. And first they were meeting in the open air, and then under this tin roof. And they stayed there for years until the mortgage was paid off. And when we met them, they had just put up a small shed in the back of the lot to store their sound gear and chairs between Sundays, and they were waiting for God to do a miracle. But as they were waiting for God to do a miracle, they started saving. Okay, that's your 5-minute warning to run to the bathroom. Started saving, growing their church. That's actually just to prove to Pastor Curtis I did set my timer because I forgot in the first service. One day they saved $5,000. And we were able to, through some donations, to add $15,000 more. So we had $20,000 to start on a $200,000 project for 4 floors of construction. And Pastor Albeiro and Diana, they literally jumped in, digging through solid volcanic rock, but fulfilling their dream. God does not care about the size of your endeavor. He does not care about the size of your challenge. He cares about the size of your obedience. And while we were just hoping to get in the footers and the columns and kind of give them a push, within a couple weeks, totally to our surprise, we had $65,000 come in, and suddenly we had a sanctuary. And they, even as they were working on their sanctuary and working on the structure, they worked on filling that sanctuary. And now the next step will be finishing up their second floor Sunday school before they move on to the third floor apartments and offices. Coming alongside amazing servants like these, I can be part of changing the destiny of hundreds and thousands of people that will come through the doors in the future. You coming alongside us, coming alongside amazing servants like these, are part of the hundreds and thousands of people that will come through those doors in the future. In everything I do as a Christian, as a missionary, I change destinies. And I change destinies because people like you changed mine. If it weren't for people that loved me, that taught me how to serve, to put up with my mistakes, and there were some doozies. If it weren't for people forgiving me, remember, we're in the church business, we forgive people, and giving me an example to follow, I would not be where I am now. If it were not for people supporting us, churches like this one, individuals, Patty and I would not be where we are now. We would not be doing what we do now. So once again, thank you. Remember I said I had an answer what the secret to missions is? It had nothing to do with money. You're the answer. You are the heart, the soul, and the future of missions. You're the heart of missions here. You're the heart of missions around the world. In being part of it, in sending, and for some of you, in going. Because there are people in this church, I have no doubt, that God has called to missions one way or another. I know one couple that right now is spending their retirement doing short-term missions trips around the world. They've been with Colombia on 2 different teams in this last year and 5 missions teams in the last year. Building, loving, and being the hands and feet of Jesus. There's no one that's too young. There's no one that's too old. There's only those that are not being obedient, and wherever God sends you. I think I did the hard part. With the pandemic, so many people stopped coming to church for a long time. It bothered me not from the aspect of not coming to church, but it bothered me from the aspect of leaving behind their family. A lot of people become more like goats that tend to wander around than sheep serving their shepherd. And far more about living in comfort than in victory, and more about being spiritual orphans than being part of a family. Now, don't get me wrong, I really don't want to be harsh. I know that some have reasons. I know some that are disillusioned. Some people are scarred for whatever reason. And some people are scared. And if you're scarred, well, yeah, people sometimes do bad things, even in churches. But if you're coming to church for the people, you're coming for the wrong reason in the first place. Now, don't get me wrong. Again, I don't want to be harsh. But the church is family, and it's time to come home. People need to return to their families, and it's time to become an example to the next generation of Bubbas that will help you go out and change the world. I need you. Your pastor needs you. And Jesus desperately wants you. And the world is waiting for you. I want to share one more story. It started with a Sunday school teacher. It was the year 1858 in the city of Boston. And Edward Kimble was a young Sunday school teacher who made it a habit to personally give each student in his class an opportunity to accept Christ as their Savior. He was concerned about one of his students specifically who worked in a shoe store. Well, one day, Edward decided to go visit the young man at the store, and he found him in the back room stocking shelves. So in this back room of this small, dingy store, he sat down and talked to that young man, and he led him to Jesus. That student was Dwight L. Moody. Moody became an international speaker and toured the British Isles. He preached in a little chapel, pastored by a young man by the name of Frederick Meyer. And in his sermon, he told the story of his Sunday school teacher, how he had sought him out and how he came to Jesus. And that message changed Pastor Meyer's ministry. And he inspired Meyer to become an evangelist like Moody. Eventually, Meyer preached in North America, in Northfield, Massachusetts. And a young preacher heard Meyer speaking and heard Meyer say the following: if you are not willing to give up everything for Christ, are you willing to be made willing? If you're not ready to give up everything for Christ, are you willing that God would make you willing? And that remark led J. Wilbur Chapman to respond to God's call on his life. And Wilbur Chapman went on to become an effective evangelist. Not a superstar, but an effective evangelist. And he enlisted the help of an ex-baseball player by the name of Billy Sunday to help set up for his crusades. Well, Billy Sunday, in setting up for those crusades, learned how to preach, and by watching Chapman, eventually took over Chapman's ministry. And where Chapman was an effective evangelist, Billy Sunday became a dynamic evangelist. Billy Sunday's preaching brought thousands to Christ. Inspired by a Billy Sunday crusade in Charlotte, North Carolina, a group of Christian men dedicated themselves to reaching their city for Christ. And so they invited another evangelist, Mordecai Ham, to come and hold a series of meetings. And that year was 1932. A local farmer, hearing about the meetings with Mordecai Ham, loaded up his pickup truck with neighbors and brought them to the meetings every night. Just a good old boy with his pickup truck, going through the country, picking up people and bringing them to church. One of those boys was a 16-year-old youth who sat in the crowd each night, spellbound by the evangelist. And each evening, the preacher seemed to be shouting and waving his finger at that young man in particular. You ever been in one of those messages, the preacher goes like this, and you feel like, whoop, right through your forehead? God, your anointing. Night after night, the teenager came, every night brought by this farmer. You think that farmer was doing ministry? And on the last night, he went forward and gave his life to Christ. That teenager's name was Billy Graham. Billy Graham has communicated the gospel to more people than any other person in history. Started an evangelistic association that his son continues to lead that reaches around the world. That runs the ministry Samaritan's Purse that does Operation Christmas Child every year that a lot of you participate in. You probably know somebody that was led to Christ through Billy Graham's ministry. And it all started with a Sunday school teacher by the name of Edward Kimble, who cared for the souls of his students sufficiently to personally make sure they knew and understood the gospel of Jesus Christ. God does not care about the size of your endeavor. He cares about the size of your obedience. Over the next few months, our obedience will look like this: giving out Christmas presents to needy kids, distributing Bibles door to door, continue on with our construction projects. But you have your obedience. What will it look like? Where will you serve? When will you serve? Your family needs you, and there are people waiting to hear your answer. This deep sense of responsibility gives me clarity that someone is waiting for me. Someone is waiting for you on the other side of your obedience. Amen. Pleasure being with you this morning again. Thank you. I hope the word has spoken to you.